somebody who is straight and bumps into their client in Woolworths might get a bit spun out, because they've seen their client. I've bumped into clients in sex on premises venues, at dance parties. Our ways of meeting clients and bumping in and navigating boundaries and the work is quite different.
We record this podcast on Gadigal land in Sydney and pay our respects to all First Nations elders, healers, and storytellers. As therapists, we recognise the wisdom that lives in land, body, and spirit, as well as the queerness that runs through nature's veins. This always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Welcome to the Gestalt Me Gently podcast. This is a chat about all things Gestalt therapy, queer perspectives, and sometimes a bit of commentary on what's going on the cultural zeitgeist. But today I have my co-host Matthew Bergen with me and also a very special guest. We have Curt Mason, who, dare I say, is a very figural person in both Matt and I's lives, has been a very impressionable mentor for me, a Gestalt therapist himself, and also the founder of NAKEDMAN, which is a beautiful community for same-sex attracted men. They do a whole bunch of workshops, retreats, and a huge camp every year. Welcome to the podcast, Curt.
Yeah, thank you. Lovely to see you both as always, and to be here.
As is customary on Gestalt Me Gently, we'd like to do a little check-in on how we're all arriving. Matt, maybe you could lead the way. How are you arriving in this moment?
I've got a little bit of excitement in my belly, sitting here with Curt and yourself, Dabaco. I've just into the gym, so I'm aware that I'm kind of feeling a little bit pumped in that sense of, blood's pumping through the body. Got on the treadmill and did my bit. So yeah, feeling kind of buzzy, which is nice. I am a fan of the Bengal spice tea, so I'm got that lovely cinnamon flavor moving in my mouth. I can smell that. I'm arriving feeling excited that our Prime Minister got to stay in for another term. So I've got a sense of joy in my heart that we're not adopting Trumpian politics here in Australia, like a certain party member was trying to push through. So yeah, I feel fresh off the excitement of an election from 2 nights ago. Yeah, so feet are on the ground, sit bones are steady and soft, and I'm channeling my inner lesbian today, which feels really solid. I've got my girls behind me. It feels great. And my others.
Beautiful. Love to hear it. I'm arriving still feeling the echoes of vibrations, having just ridden my motorbike back down from the Blue Mountains. I had a lovely little spontaneous evening with some friends listening to some jazz last night in Katoomba. And yeah, arriving nourished, a little bit underslept, but very excited for today's chat. And yeah, Curt, I'm curious how you're arriving to Gestalt Me Gently right now.
I've had a little afternoon siesta, just jumped in the shower, had a little shave and freshen up as I found doing it on a video. So I thought I'd better, get out my dressing gown. On the back end of a really lovely weekend, we've had the Oyster Festival down in Narooma, which is where I live on the far south coast. So yeah, just had some friends and been eating well and drinking well and catching up and doing some lovely things. And I've got my lovely dog Ollie here, who's just passed out next to me. So we had a big long walk on the beach this morning. So yeah, feeling good.
Sounds like you're living your best life.
I am.
Now, I'm really excited about this conversation because, Curt, dare I speak for both of us, Matt, you are responsible for gently guiding both of us into the journey of becoming a Gestalt therapist. And it actually reminds me of this meme that crops up every now and again where someone says, I asked my therapist who their therapist was. I went to that therapist and asked that therapist who their therapist was, so I could So I could battle the final boss. And I feel like, the lineage of Gestalt therapists, I get really curious to ask you, how did you come across Gestalt therapy? How did that begin for you?
Okay. Well, Gestalt therapy started later on in my therapy career because I'd already been training in the UK as a person-centered therapist. So I did my degree in the UK back in 20, 2001. Um, and then came to Australia in 2003. And I used to work for ACON. At the time, it was the AIDS Council of New South Wales, but I think now it's just called ACON. And they asked me to set up their after hours counseling program. So they had a daytime counseling program and they wanted a volunteer after hours program. So I set that up. And I guess one of the things I noticed in that program was we were interviewing, you know, I don't know, 10, 20 counselors a year and bringing them into the service. And I was noticing the distinct difference between the Gestalt trained volunteers versus some of the other counselors that weren't Gestalt trained. And that got me really curious about the training. I then became friends with somebody who ran a training program, and then I was working with a couple of people who were Gestalt trained, and so I thought, "You know what? I think I probably need to do some more training," and so I looked into Gestalt in Sydney, and at the time it was Gestalt was huge for a while, sort of in Australia, really. There was many schools, and, so I did my master's in Sydney. Initially I was trying to remember because it was all acronyms back then. So it was the Sydney Gestalt Institute, SGI. So I was with them for 2 years, and then 2 years in, they closed down, and I then moved to GTS, which was Gestalt Therapy Sydney, and I finished my master's there. And then I ended up working there for a little while as well, but, yeah, so that was my introduction into Gestalt, how I kind of found it and discovered it and decided to retrain in it. Mm.
It's really interesting to hear about these different chapters, particularly of Gestalt institutes in Sydney, as Matt and I studied at the Relational Institute Australia, which is now changing form and no longer going to be a pathway for up and coming Gestalt therapists. It's kind of changing into something else. But it's exciting the way you spoke about the richness of opportunities to train Gestalt in Sydney, whereas now it kind of feels like there's a little bit more of a vacuum appearing, at least here in Sydney.
I think there's been a lot of changes in the way in which people train as therapists and just the industry as a whole, really. I feel like when I first started training in the UK, it was just on the tail end and the beginning of that kind of pure experiential way of learning where you literally walked into a room of 10 people, sat down and went, "Okay, here we are for 2 days." And what's gonna come up, you know? It was almost like the Rogerian kind of encounter groups. Um, and then a lot of those schools got affiliated to universities or to other education systems to try and formalize their training, and that was when things sort of started to shift away a little bit from the experiential. But I feel like Gestalt always had a very, very, very firm footing in the experiential as they transitioned into more of the academic, which is why I think the therapists that were coming through those training programs when I was working at ACON had a very different way of being able to come in and sit with a client very quickly or easily. They already had something in them that they'd been learning and growing.
Mm. Do you think, Kurt, that might have been like the relationality of Gestalt, that there's that kind of interface that's occurring like in the here and now, and that kind of maybe as Gestalties, there's a sense of being quick on your feet, reading the room, rising to the occasion?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I was training, there was a very strong emphasis still on the relational work in the room being a frame in which you learn the theory.
Mm.
So as things would come up between you and Bob and Mary, you'd be dealing with though whatever that is that was coming up between you, Bob and Mary, and then later on in the training, a therapist would reflect back on what was happening, but through the theoretical lens of Gestalt. So you not only got the theory and the academic aspect of it, you actually got the felt experience of it. So it went ka-ching, ka-ching, right? It went into your heart and your head all at once, which was definitely uh, I'm biased, so I still think that's a wonderful way of learning.
You're in good company there. I think we've drunk the Kool-Aid on.
I was gonna say we've all drunk from the same Kool-Aid.
So this podcast, we're really wanting to kind of bring that queer perspective into the conversation. And I'm curious, having studied a few different modalities and primarily continuing to work in Gestalt, do you think it lends itself particularly well to working with queer folk, gay men, like the wider queer community that are navigating life outside the kind of mold or current of heteronormativity? What are your thoughts on that?
When you told me what we'd be talking about, I thought I found that question quite interesting because I'd say yes and not necessarily. Yeah.
Mm.
So like I think for me, when I think about what makes um, a therapist good enough to work with the queer community, I think a lot of that's to do with the therapist. I think I think you can have some amazing Gestalt therapists who wouldn't have a clue how to work with queer community, and they would miss lots of stuff around it, lots of aspects to it. Um, and then there would be amazing Gestalt therapists who can and do work really well in those models. I mean, I used to have a supervisor who wasn't Gestalt trained. She came from a different modality, and she identified, I guess, as heterosexual. I imagined there wasn't any points of reference that would indicate otherwise. Um, but she had a perspective, and this was a long time ago. This was 20 years ago, where I remember she said to me, um, you've got to remember that the governing body that governs psychotherapy is looking at that model and looking at that governance from a heterosexual lens. So, you know, uh, somebody who is straight and bumps into their client in Woolworths might get a bit spun out, because they've seen their client. I've bumped into clients in sex on premises venues, at dance parties. Like, there's been lots of really spicy areas that I've bumped into clients, and so from that concept to the fact that we live in a minority community, our ways of meeting clients and bumping in and navigating boundaries and the work is quite different, and so she was the first person who showed me how to see that differently, even though there weren't any kind of specific guidelines around it, or guidance around it. So I think it's useful. I always just say to anyone who's going to start with a therapist, interview some. Like, don't think for a moment that like you're paying for their service, right? So interview them. Don't go in there on the back foot. like, be proactive. Go in and ask some pretty good questions. So if it's important to you that, a therapist knows a little bit about queer community or about your particular way of being in the world, check it out.
Yeah, great point to really like shop around for the right therapist, because that safety, that rapport, that also shorthand, particularly when it comes to queer identity, not needing to explain a lot of that stuff, but there's a kind of already shared language and shared knowledge there, at least in my experience being a client working with gay queer therapists. There's just I feel it's so much easier to speak in that space than if maybe I was working with a straight, less from the queer community realm therapist.
Well, so I want to speak to that as well, because again, I would have agreed many years ago, I would have probably said something similar until I started working with a therapist who never told me their sexuality.
Mm.
Like, I asked on a few occasions, and the therapist's perspective was, this is important that you hold the not knowing in the room with me, so that I can hold any of the ways in which you see me. And it was the best piece of therapy I've probably had. And to this day, and I worked with them for 14 years, I still don't know whether they're gay or straight. I have my suspicions, my projections, and that not knowing allowed me way more scope to work on a lot of areas for myself. And they held every single one, like, so, and that's what I mean by it's the therapist, right? Like,
Mm.
who they are and how they bring their knowledge and expertise and themselves into the room. And yeah, I've got a lot of respect for that client, for that therapist. Yeah.
Sounds like a real gift that therapist
It
gave you.
it was my dad that I had to work with. He was
Yeah.
that perfect. He was that perfect opportunity to work with the masculine and do that father paternal work with for a lot of years. Yeah, he was love him dearly, have him in my he speaks in my head every now and then. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
It is interesting. No, thanks for that, Kurt. And for me, it's also that idea of when I'm sitting with a client and whether or not I bring myself into the room as a gay man. I mean, wearing a t-shirt that says Sydney lesbian is probably a bit of a giveaway. But if I wasn't wearing this t-shirt, um, there's that sense of like whether or not I sense that they're perhaps going to a bit of a shame spiral, or that like they're talking about, their addictive sexual practices or something like that. And it's kind of like there's a part where I was like, is it okay if I bring myself into the room here and speak to you about my queerness? Because what I've noticed is like there's a shame piece sometimes there, not always, around, enjoying the pleasures of the flesh and going to sex on venue premises or bait camps or stuff like that. So it's interesting because when I have brought myself in and spoken to my queerness, it's like you can relax, you can take a breath, you don't have to carry shame with me about this stuff.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that's when I've kind of seen quite radical change in somebody, how they're holding themselves. But yeah, interesting. I guess that's a bit of a maybe poetic to what you had just expressed as well.
I think there's just no one way of doing it, right? Like, you're gonna get a queer therapist who doesn't meet that other queer in their place, and you're gonna get that straight therapist who's gonna meet that queer person in their place.
Mm.
It's very much, and this is Gestalt. This is Gestalt. It's about the relationship, and that's it. That's the fundamentals for me. It's about that relationship, and so is that relationship strong enough to be able to hold the times when you miss a client, and hopefully uh, uh, hopefully I remember a friend of mine who was a therapist saying, you just hope that sometimes you've made enough deposits in the bank account that you can take a few withdrawals. You know? And I think that's a really good analogy sometimes. You
Yes.
know, if you meet a client enough, those moments where you miss them or don't get them can be worked on as much, if not more, therapeutically, um, and have a lot of value, you know,
Mm,
because we
mhm.
do get missed. We don't always get met in life. Yeah, that's the reality of it.
For sure.
We need to be able to build up some capacity in ourselves to be able to navigate that too.
Speaking
Mm.
of relationships in the therapy room, you have a few more years experience as a therapist on both Matt and I. I'm wondering not just relationships in the therapy space, but relationships outside the therapy room. Does being a therapist make you better at relationships? And I want to caveat this. This question was inspired by a ex partner of mine who often in arguments would say, "Tobacco, you're a therapist. You should know better." And that just sent me that was the button. That was the button to push.
Yeah, yeah,
And you know, we're all human. We all have
mm.
arguments with friends and partners and family, but I'm curious, what's your take on that idea of, does being a therapist make you better at relationships and relating?
Gosh, that's such a good question. Um, Look, I always think as a when you train as a therapist, you're learning a tool that the way I describe it is like putting on a pair of glasses. It's like it's a set of lenses that you get to view the world through. And therefore, 100%, I can see things that my training and my experience have taught me how to see and experience. That's the beauty of therapy, right? I mean, the therapy room is a sacred space. It's a space in which the container and the role of the therapist in many ways is to try and keep the dynamic between you and your client as clear as possible without too much murkiness coming in and interrupting the process. Well, that doesn't translate outside in the world. That's not possible to do when you're with friends or lovers or partners or husbands or wives or whatever, because those dynamics are murky. They are too close for you to see sometimes things. So I would say yes, again, here I am in my good Gestalt chair. Yes and no. You know, One of the things that sometimes, I guess sometimes I feel like I wish I could turn it off a little bit sometimes. That I sometimes maybe feel like notice things or see things where I just think, it might be nicer to be more ignorant to this,
Mm.
and not be able to see it so much. Yeah. A big one for me around that was when I was sort of transitioning, I guess, out from being my party boy, self to coming more into, whatever that part of my life was back then. And it was hard because there was a sort of an ignorance that I had that allowed me to stay in that way of being in my life, that to keep it going. And then obviously as I started to have therapy and was in some of my training, I started to see what was happening to myself, to those around me, to just the scene in general that I was mixing in, and it became less possible to ignore it.
Mm.
And so that transition point from that world into another, that was tricky, that was difficult. And also when sometimes you're in, meeting new people, it's an interesting one. You're like, "Oh, okay." That that's an interesting thing to say, or, "Oh, that's a funny position to take," or whatever.
Mm.
Yeah,
Mm.
that's
Yeah, I'm wondering, Matt, do you have a take on that?
Yeah, I'm just sitting with Kurt, and I just noticed a couple of things there. Um, I noticed, Kurt, how you relate to your partner. Sometimes I get that there's big cookers going on when getting a naked man camp up and stuff like that, and the amount of work that goes on months and months beforehand, and the intensity. And I sometimes from the outside can see, there's a pressure cooker environment there on yourselves, your relationship with your partner. But I also see you kind of hold and language things with curiosity. And it's like, hey, I'm just a little curious around this. Is it the right time for me to be asking you of this? So I do notice you kind of hold things with some sensitivity and some wisdom in that. And yeah, I really admire that in you. And I'm not too sure whether that's just, being with a partner for 20 odd years. I'm not too sure how long you guys have been together, but there are times where I see there's a lovely tenderness there. So yeah, and I really kind of think, that's something that I admire. I look up to that. Yeah.
very nice of you to say that, Matt.
Yeah.
I'm not sure from inside looking out, I feel like that.
Mm.
But it's sometimes really lovely to see how other people might see it, I mean, particularly in the build I mean, with me and Lewis, I mean, we've been together 23 years, I think. Um, with we've got our own language, we've got our own way of communicating this stuff. Um, yeah. So there's a there's a forgiveness in mine and his communication with each other that from the outside people might think, bloody hell, that's a bit sharp. But between us, it's different. There's a different level of I don't know,
Mm.
capacity to hold it. I don't know.
Uh-huh. Is there that capacity to go into repair for you both because of 22 years in a relationship, but also because of, you being able to lead Lewis into some of this tenderness around relating?
Yeah. We definitely do massive debriefs like every I mean, I'll be honest, at the camp, at the actual camp itself, me and Lewis barely see each other. He's running around doing his thing, I'm running around doing my thing. And every now and then we'll kind of grab each other and go, let's go and sit down for 5 minutes and we'll have a little debrief about what's going on. When we're at camp, it's usually that's where the fun stuff is, it's where we're so adrenaline uh, and we're getting so much positive feedback for the majority of the time from people, and we're seeing these incredible things happening space that it's just so heartwarming, and it makes all the kind of 6 months before that of
Yeah. Yeah.
all
That's
worthwhile,
lovely to
you know?
thank
I'm
you. That's lovely
wondering,
to hear.
we've mentioned Naked Man and camp a couple of times now. Maybe this is a great segue, at least for our listeners that aren't so clued into what Naked Man is as an organization. Like, would you be able to give us a bit of a intro into how Naked Man started and where it has gotten to today? Because Matt and I are both blessed to be part of the Naked Man community and facilitating things and stepping more and more into the organization. But yeah, I'd love to hear in your own words, Kurt, a bit about the birth of Naked Man and where it is today.
Well, I mean, I always feel like if someone's got a passion about something enough to start a community or to work intrinsically in certain areas, there's usually something in themselves that has birthed that in some way. And so I think for me, it's sort of probably similar back to that transition point I talked earlier. There was a recognition in me that there was something about my sexuality and my way of engaging in sex that just was not um doing me good. It was not useful for me anymore. It wasn't working in the same way. Um, and so myself and Lewis went on a no, it started so I started to sort of try and find, what's out there that I can step into. And I discovered a few things in Europe which were a lot easier for me to engage in because I wasn't working there. Or I did in the end, but I wasn't at the time. And so, yeah, so I went on a retreat. I went on a 7-day retreat in Barcelona, and yeah, it was transformative. It was the facilitator at the time, a beautiful guy called Peter. He was a Gestalt therapist, and he was also trained as a sexological body worker. Now, at that time, I was a Gestalt therapist, but I had no idea what a sexological body worker was. And so he got me into that lane, um, where I discovered the incredible and amazing Deej and Uma, who run a sexological bodywork training. Joseph Kramer, who's the founder of that, who started Body Electric in America and then transitioned into running training people in sexological bodywork. And so I ended up doing that training, I'm going to say 10 years ago, maybe a bit more. That was intense. That was a training and a half. Um, that was a training and a half, but boy, was that kind of changed everything. That really built my passion for we need this out in our community, and we need to be getting this stuff out there. And yeah, and that was where it kind of began. We went to a in Victoria. They used to have or they might still do, I don't know. They had a camp weekend called Nude Man Fest, and myself and Lewis went along to it, had an amazing time. But the thing that I was aware of was that there was no workshops. There was a lot of stuff going on, but there was no workshops. And so the second year, I ran a couple of workshops. They went down really well. And so we approached the guy and said, "Look, we'd love to be your franchise in New South Wales. Like, you're in Victoria. We can jump on your website and we can kind of combine stuff." And he didn't want that. But he did give us his blessing. He said, "Well, just do it yourself." And so then that was where it kind of started to unfold. It was a little bit more complicated than that. There was a few kind of roads we had to travel and navigate, but more or less that was where Naked Man kind of stemmed from. Since then, it's been, ever moving beast. We've had to, we've expanded and contracted, and um, I feel like we found a nice. I feel like we found a nice. I feel like I've found a nice pace with it now. I think a mixture of passion and drive was amazing to begin with, but I think it burnt me out, and I didn't realize it had burnt me out until COVID. And when COVID kind of put the kibosh on everything, um, restarting that machine, I couldn't quite start it in the same way, and it was a more steadier pace. And so since then, I feel like we've found some of our core trainings, if you like, and offerings, and then we bring in, you know, some weird and wonderful facilitators from all over Australia who offer just these incredible things. I just love the kookiness of it. It's just wonderful. Yeah, everyone's got their kooky ideas, and these wonderful kind of teachings and offerings that you just don't get in the mainstream. You just don't get it in the mainstream. So and it's challenging, and they're fun, and they're exciting, and bit saucy and spicy, but, you know, underpinning everything is elements that are really needed, not just in our community, but in the world as a whole, but in our community big time. Yeah.
I mean, this feels like a very natural place for a plug here. If this is kind of stimulating some curiosity in you as you listen, the next camp is coming up in the middle of November.
Do you want me to do shameless plugging now or?
Go for it.
Sure, you can throw a plug or two in, a little ad break.
Yeah, great. We've got a sensual massage retreat happening at the end of June. We've only got about 6 spaces left on that now, but that's a really lovely, if you want to learn how to give a really beautiful sensual erotic massage and to understand what's actually involved in that, that it's not just a, you know, a tweak of muscles and then a happy ending at the end. You get to actually learn how to give a very beautiful massage and even offer it as a service if that's what you're interested in, as a paid service. Um, so we do that, and then we've got, yeah, all our other stuff. Secret Society. I did an interview with Joy FM, and the one of the guys on there he came along. We said, come to our workshops so you can see what they are, and he called it the Educated Man's Circle Jerk, which I love. And I've used it on occasion because it really can sum up Secret Society very well.
That's a great quote. Perfect quote.
Touching base on some of the moving forward to like the, I guess, the rebranding with the camp as things shift and morph, and just how the future might be kind of, by deleting the word men and calling it the Naked Camp. I feel like there's some progress there, and perhaps some agitation from the elder gay community where it's kind of like, well, hang on a minute, where's the man word gone? So yeah, I'm just curious about this new space that the camp's going into by taking, you know, the man out, and what offering that might bring to the broadening of contemporary society, or bringing in, you know, the non-binary and the trans men. Do you care to share a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I mean, I guess first of all, the shift has been that the camp be taken in a different direction. Initially, the camp was part of Naked Man. Naked Man is the organization that runs workshops and retreats and groups and the camp. And we were just finding that the camp was getting too big. It started with 70 people and the last camp was 300. And me and Lewis were still running it. Me and Lewis is my partner. We were still running it. So when it got to, we decided that for the camp to continue, it needed to change, and that change needed to come in the way that it was structurally formed. So we've now got a committee, and those committee members form the different areas of how the camp is run. So that's probably the biggest aspect of the change. Moving it to calling it the Naked Camp was one way. One thing was to move it away from Naked Man to create a space where it's like these are two separate things. And then deciding to call it the Naked Camp rather than the Naked Man Camp was just an acknowledgement that we're moving, we're shifting, something's happening in the, you know, Gestalt field, if we want to call, you know, come back to a bit of theory. There's something shifting, and we need to make some space for that. We've always wanted to include trans men, non-binary folk, same-sex attracted men, and there's been lots and lots of discussion around that. I think first and foremost is our primary group of people we work with are same-sex attracted men. That's who we work with. I say that very deliberately because otherwise we work. There are men who don't identify as gay, who don't identify as bi, so we throw the net very far as we're wanting um men who are attracted to men. um Trans men, I would have loved to have had more trans men come into the space. Of the trans men that have attended in the camp, when we've had some really deep discussions with people, I think what's been the biggest struggle is it's very challenging for a lot of people to step into a space and be naked if you've never done that before. It's a whole next level
Mm.
if you identify as a trans man stepping into a space where it's primarily cis men and
Mm.
being naked. Like, that's a whole other ball game. So I can really appreciate that the camp has been a much more trickier space to maybe navigate for trans men. Um,
Mm.
Non-binary folk, again, very welcome. We've been getting more and more people who identify as they, them in the space, or they, them, he, his. Um, and again, we've tried to make sure that we're keeping the space as safe and inviting as possible, whilst also noting that this is a space that's primarily for same-sex attracted men.
Mm.
So just within that, it's making sure that, yeah, that we're keeping the space educated and
Mm.
informed and safe as best we can. And this is the other thing. It's like the spaces out there are tricky to navigate in the world, full stop, for anyone who's trans or non-binary. So creating space where those people can come in and feel safe, we try our best. And then, but we've got a cross section of people who attend, and some of those people are either transphobic, not, they're uneducated, they're ignorant, and so there is an element that we hold as facilitators and organizers in trying to educate people up as um as we're continuing. Yeah.
Mm. Thanks for sharing that. I definitely feel that that's kind of alive in as the camps are evolving, and that awareness raising that's occurring with the diversity of the community, being able to hold that and create a safe portal for people. So yeah, no, it's great to hear you share that. So I really appreciate that.
Mm.
I just also, before we change subject, just the idea of how you as a facilitator at camp, like the concept of Gestalt Me Gently was something that we kind of arrived at. It's like, how is it that I've experienced Gestalt in your holding? And what I noticed at Naked Man Camp is how you, with 300 people, bring in this relationality and then the ecotherapy as well, and how we're kind of picking up bits of grass and speaking to it, speaking to place and speaking to self. And, these Gestalt techniques that have been gentle, but they've been really empowering and effective. And yeah, I'm just kind of curious is that just Curt and that's what you do, or that's a conscious way in which you kind of build relationality?
um I think first and foremost it has to come back to me, like my own um understanding of the importance and the value of what it is I'm inviting people to do. Like,
Mm.
if it's just tokenistic, it's just bullshitty. It doesn't hold any weight or value, and I think that's what people pick up in some of um, the rituals that I bring into creating that opening ceremony, which I think you're talking about. How do you there's so many things to keep in mind with something like that. How do we that opening ceremony is it's it's setting the scene. It's setting the space. And I'm doing that in many different ways. One is by making people put your drinks down, take your sunglasses off, come into contact with your body, come into contact with 300 people in a circle, make eye contact, like this stuff for some people, they've never done that.
Mm.
They're like, "It's radical." For other people, they do it all the time. There's nothing radical about it, it's just something they would do naturally. So there's that element of just trying to bring everybody in about around this is we're stepping into a different space here. This isn't just gonna be your normal experience of gathering, as a collective of men. A d this is gonna be different. And so I think that's really important. Um, but then there's some of the things that I bring in are just to me, they're the things that are gonna hold the space. And that to me is, introducing ourselves to the land. It's not our land. It's a new space. It's on new country. It's coming in and it's acknowledging that we're somewhere different. It was a ritual that was shared to me that I just found really beautiful around around actually physically coming into contact with the land. There's something really beautiful about the way you put it back. So it takes away that colonizing kind of, I'm just going to take this. It's like, no, no, you're connecting to it and then it goes back down onto the
Yes.
ground. Um, so there's those kinds of things that I find that are really important to me around the indigenous nature of the country that I'm in. That to me is just really sacred and very important. To me, it's um, yeah. I've had some very strong lessons when I haven't maybe understood something and have just decided I'm gonna do it for effect, even though maybe I wasn't aware I was doing it for effect. Yeah, I've certainly learned some strong lessons around integrity around that stuff. Um, And then, just also bringing in and acknowledging some of our queer ancestors is also for me very, very important. There's a really, um, Matt and Dabaco, you've seen how much maybe it's part of this is me stepping into my 50s and recognizing that there is a issue in our community around age that needs to be addressed, and that's one of the things I really try to strongly bring in is this communication and valuing of generations within our community, because we've got people in their early 20s and we've got people in their mid 80s coming to our camp. So, I want to make sure that we're all trying to create some dialogue around who we are and what we bring into that space. And, you know, there's a very easy invisibility that can start to happen to some of the men in the elder bracket. And to me, that's a massive disrespect and a massive loss that needs to get addressed in the space of Naked Man. Likewise, I think there can be a disrespect and a dismissing of what some of our younger community bring into that space as well. So to me, it's really important that we create some kind of bridge uh,
Mm.
that divide, because it's a strong divide in our community that desperately needs to get that need it needs some work on, it needs to shift.
Mm.
It's a great
Yeah.
point, and I think the camp is one of these very special opportunities where community that's so often siloed and separated into age brackets and niches and bears and twinks and all the things that gay community does to kind of categorize and separate. I feel like camp where 300 men of all different ages and experiences and identities get to come together. It's a beautiful, yeah, unfortunately rare opportunity for that cross pollination and the conversations that probably don't get too many opportunities to be had in the everyday world. So I feel really honored to be part of that space and being able to access that space as well.
And it also really talks to attraction
Mm.
and what happens when we only navigate our relationships, whether those are friendships or sexual partners or lovers, when we only navigate those through a lens of attraction, it is a narrow bar in which we miss out so much, so much that other communities and cultures don't have. That bar is not, it's broadened, and it's just so valuable.
I think what you're beautifully speaking to me is like connection and what it's like to be in connection with the other when there's not attraction, running the ship. So it's kind of like, well, how do we attend and be in connection on a workshop and be doing deep, human felt, heart, soul touching connection without being attracted to the person that's in front of you and being able to kind of acknowledge that. And it's like, I'm here meeting you person to person and that deep humanity that comes out of that. And that's a lot of the lessons that I've learned on, Naked Man, is that I can be in relationship to people and I can, be loving and connected, and also not run by attraction, not run by my dick brain in that sense of, what we've talked about, some of that stuff. So yeah, I think that's really powerful.
And there's a spectrum with that, right? I mean, there's that spectrum, which is I'm not attracted to you and I can be with the humanness of our relationship. And that can be in a working with touch and even erotic, sensual, intimate touch. And then there's also another part of that, which can be, I'm not attracted to you, and then when we connect, there's an attraction in that connection that that is an attraction in connection. I've never experienced this before. I've never not physically been attracted to somebody and and had attraction.
Mhm.
Yeah, so, like, there's that end, and then there's also the other end of, "Wow, I'm so fucking attracted to you," and then, "Oh, this connection is shit."
Mm.
You know? So, like, there's a full spectrum there to work in that we get an opportunity to do a bit more of, but it's also people's personal journey. Some people, that opportunity is laid out in front of them, and they don't wanna take it. So that's okay too.
Mm. Yeah, I feel like we're starting to move into the home stretch of our conversation and time together. I want to bring it back into the Gestalt private practice, and I'm really curious, Kurt, about, in your years of experience, do you feel like there's particular areas of expertise or particular kind of archetypes of clients that seem to keep on coming your way? Because, for me, I'm still growing my practice, but feel really clear in this moment that I'm there for queer community and folks that are navigating ethical non-monogamy and open relating and moving more and more into couples work. Matt, I'm also curious, how are you how do you currently language yourself and your niche?
Yeah, I would say I'm queer affirming, and yeah, there's something around belonging and how I can sit with somebody and be in this idea that you have a place in the world, take up space, that there is a belonging that is your birthright. So there's something around belonging for me. I'm also really curious about EMDR and brain spotting. So that kind of the deep side of the brain and the neuroplasticity of the brain. So I'm kind of diving into that area now as well. Um,
Mm.
so yeah, it's all, as well as the beginning of my journey as a therapist. But I also, lived experience, wrote down lived experience here. I just kind of feel that there's something in this space around, lived experience and therapy, and being able to kind of hold that and on that. That might be a different chat that we do with Kurt down the future.
Quite
But
possibly. Many, many more
yes.
topics to explore, but I want to bring it back to you, Kurt. Like, what has been your experience like working with countless clients, and is there kind of similar themes that continue to emerge and come through client work for you? How have you found that? And also, what are you kind of most interested in working with clients around?
Um, I mean, how I sort of identify as a therapist now has really changed. I don't even know if I call myself a therapist anymore. I did a big process around during and after COVID around um, when you've been doing this kind of work for 20 odd years, I've I've had so many different influences. So that thing around the lens of Gestalt, I've got a lens of person-centered therapy, I've got a lens of mindfulness practice, I've got a lens of sexological body work, I've got a lens of sex education, I've got various other trainings that I've done over the years. And so trying to define who trying to define what I offer has become almost too difficult. So I now just say, I'm Curt and I'm Curt Mason, and let's sit together for a session and let's see if I'm the right fit for you, if you're the right fit for me. My years of working at Acon taught me how to refer on and do good assessments. So I know pretty early on whether I'm the right fit for somebody, and vice versa. So that's kind of where I sit now as far as what I offer. Um, the areas that Lewis always sort of laughs because I do tend to gravitate towards people who have a more kind of spicy childhood, shall we say, where there's a little bit of where there's been some big disruptions in people's growing up. Um So whether that's been neglect or around kind of um, any kind of violence or sexual trauma and stuff like that, those tend to be my areas that I do kind of gravitate more towards. Yeah, that does just tend to be where I'm putting something out there and I'm getting something back. Uh,
Mm,
the clients
mm.
that I see nowadays. But again, like I'm pretty open to working with most things. I think recognizing where there are areas that you just know that maybe you're not as experienced or skilled in is important, but you can also surprise yourself sometimes, I think, in those areas too. Sometimes that not knowing um can help you see more because you're not the expert.
Yeah, that's a great point. That curiosity that is so, homogenous with the Gestalt perspective, staying curious, bracketing, just um, yeah, asking the right questions in the right moments. I feel like so much of therapy comes back to that and presence.
And this is our tool, right? This is like
Mm.
the therapist. This this is the tool that we've learned to work with. And so when the thing that brings me back to my passion around this work all the time is when I'm working. I remember um reading an article and it talked about psychotherapy, a science or an art. And it talked about it through the lens of art. And it blew my mind as a concept of how to work with a client. And when me and a client are in a deep piece of work with each other, the only way that the pair of us can describe it fully is it's like someone's put a piece of clay in front of us and we're both shaping this thing into a form that can be understood and seen and recognized and related to. And that process, can be in one session or it can be over a period of longer sessions. And it's that when I'm in that with somebody, that's powerful. Like that's where something magical is happening, and I'm not quite sure I can put words to what that is in a really scientific way, but it's when I experience and the client seems to experience the most growth. Mm.
What an inspiring metaphor. I feel like this is an ideal place for us to land. If people are listening and they're curious about reaching out and understanding a bit more about your work and getting in touch, maybe to do a session, where can people find you, Kurt?
Probably best on the either on the Naked Man website, so that's nman.com.au. You can just send a message through there. I've got a very old website. I'm almost embarrassed to say. I used to have a therapy practice, and so I've got a very old website that still has my email address to it. I keep saying I'm going to do the new email address, and it hasn't. The website, and it hasn't come yet. Um, but that's therapyspace.com.au. Curt Mason at therapyspace.com.au. So therefore,
Beautiful. It has been an absolute treat and a pleasure to have this chat with you, Kurt, on Gestalt Me Gently. Thank you for joining us.
yeah, you're very welcome. It's been lovely. Thank you.
Thank you, Kurt. It's been lovely to have your company and to hear your wisdom. And yeah, it's been a real joy. Hopefully we can get you back again sometime soon.
Yeah, for sure. I'd love that.
Certainly. All right. Sending lots of love to you all. Mwah.
Bye.
Ciao, ciao. Bye-bye.